The best way to learn about investing is to study great investors. Without a doubt, one of my favorite investors to study is Charlie Munger. Charlie Munger is perhaps best known as the vice chairman of the world's greatest compound interest machine, Berkshire Hathaway. In the time of his and Warren Buffett's reign as the leaders of Berkshire, the company has returned roughly 2 million% on its initial value, or 20,000 to 1. This was accomplished in the adult lifetime of 2 men, simply by investing the capital of the company in an increasing number of prosperous enterprises and without dangerous amounts of borrowing. I apply learnings from Munger in my job as an investment analyst for a multi-billion-dollar fund in New York City. Here's my 6 favorite lessons I have learned from Charlie Munger.
So you talk about your circle of competence and you should stick to it and try to expand it.
Oh yeah, well, it's a hugely important thing. Knowing the edge of your, it's hardly a competence if you don't know the edge of it. You know, if you have a misapprehension regarding your own competency, that means you lack competency. You're going to make terrible mistakes. So hardly anything is. I think you got to constantly measure what you achieve against what other people have achievement, and you have to keep being determinedly rational and avoiding a lot of self-delusion. But after a lifetime of observing it, I think the tendency to be pretty rational about one's own competency is largely genetic. I think people like Warren and I were just born this way. Now, it took a lot of education, but I think we were born with the right temperament to do what we did. And I have no way of taking you back and rebirthing you.
And why is there so little healthcare in the Berkshire portfolio? And I mean, isn't there something that, can you comment on that?
I think we don't understand it well enough, and we don't like a lot that we do understand. Those are 2 pretty good reasons for not investing. The idea of diversification makes sense to a point. If you don't know what you're doing and you want the standard result and not be embarrassed, well, of course, you can widely diversify. Now, nobody's entitled to a lot of money for recognizing that because it's a truism. It's like knowing that 2 and 2 equals 4. But the investment professionals think they're helping you by arranging a diversification. An idiot could diversify a portfolio, or a computer for that matter. But the whole trick of the game is to have a few times when you know that something is better than average, and invest only where you have that extra knowledge. And then if you get just a few opportunities, that's enough. And what the hell does you care? You own 3 securities and J.P. Morgan Chase owns 100. You know, what's wrong with owning a few securities? Warren always says if you lived in a growing town and you owned stock in 3 of the best enterprises in the town, isn't that diversified enough? The answer is, of course it is. They're all wonderful places. And that Fortune's formula, which got so famous, which was a formula to tell people how much to bet on each transaction if you had an edge. And of course, the bigger your edge, the more close the transaction was to a certain winner, the more you should bet. And of course, there's mathematics behind it. But of course it's true. It's perfectly possible to buy only one thing because the opportunity is so great and it's such a cinch, or only 2 or 3. So the whole idea of diversification when you're looking for excellence is totally ridiculous. It doesn't work. It gives you an impossible task. What fun is it to do an impossible task over and over again? I find it agony. The topic I'd like to talk about briefly is common sense.
Which isn't common.
Yes. See? And what people mean when they say a man has common sense is uncommon sense. And usually they don't mean that the man has a narrow little activity he's good at, like knitting sweaters, and he sticks to that. what they mean is a man that can operate over a pretty broad range of human territory without making any big boners. And that is a very important thing to be good at. And the question is how you get it. I was very lucky in my own life because every place I looked, at the pinnacle, there was a guy that was better than I was. And one of my father's best friends was a great surgeon with a vast mechanical ability. And I knew what this man did with his mechanical abilities and inventing all these spreaders and things he used to do his operation, but I would never be as good as he was. And everywhere I looked, there was somebody like that. And there was all this folly out there, and I suddenly realized, like, if I just avoid all the folly, maybe I can get an advantage without having to be really good at anything. And I kept doing that all my life, and it worked so well that I enjoy sharing it with people like you. It really works to tackle much of life by inversion, where you just twist the thing around backwards and answer it that way. I have to give problems to my children, and once when I had all of them together, I said, well, there's an activity in America. There's a one-on-one tournament. And the national champion became the national champion on 2 separate occasions, 65 years apart. Name the activity. And 7 of my children could not remotely do it. The 8th is a PhD physicist, and he did it very quickly. And what he did was he just turned it around. He says, can it be athletic? And he realized that no 85-year-old was ever going to win an athletic thing with the neurological and other deteriorations that are so evident tonight on the stage. And so I said, well, could it be chess? He's a chess player. And he realized that no 85-year-old was ever going to be the U.S. chess champion. He knows what a chess tournament is like. But that led him to checkers, a game that he could almost master with enough experience. And of course, that was the correct answer. It took him about 15 seconds. All kinds of problems like that look so difficult. When you turn them around, they are quickly solved. And so this process that I've gone through life doing of identifying folly and trying to avoid it has worked wonderfully for me. Another trick that I got very early was that I loved big ideas that had a lot of instructive power. And I liked them so well that I didn't mind when they were in somebody else's territory. I just went in and took the ideas. So I paid no attention to the territorial boundaries of academic disciplines. And I just grabbed all the big ideas that I could. And then I used them in daily activity to solve problems and amuse myself and do self-education and so forth. Well, that makes me a collector. I'm a collector of inanity. And I've cataloged the inanities on structures in my head. And it's been a wonderful thing to do. If you stop to think about it, how many unhappy collectors do you know? Whether they collect silver or mistresses or, by and large, collectors are happy. And collecting inanities is just wonderful. If you collect stamps the way I once did, I soon had a U.S. stamp collection I couldn't afford to add a stamp to. Well, what fun is collecting when you can't afford the next stamp? When you're collecting inanities, there's never a shortage. And there's all this low-hanging fruit.
Just a question on how you think about downside protection and how do you know when to exit an investment?
Well, you're not talking to a great exiter. My Berkshire I bought in 1966. I've been a good picker, but other people know more about exiting. I'm trying never to have to exit. So you're talking to the wrong. I think there's working styles of investments that work well with constant exits. It just hasn't happened to have been my forte. So I'm no good at exits. I don't like even looking for exits. I'm looking for holes. Think of the pleasure I get from watching Costco march ahead. Such an utter meritocracy, and it does so well. Why would I trade that experience for a series of transactions that made me a little... First place, I'd be less rich, not more, after taxes. In the second place, it's a much less satisfactory life than rooting for people I like and admire. So I say find Costco's, not good exits.
How worried are you by the declines in the share price of Berkshire Hathaway, the difficulties the company's in?
This is the third time that Warren and I have seen our holdings in Berkshire go down top tick to bottom tick by 50%. I think it's in the nature of long-term shareholding with the normal vicissitudes in worldly outcomes and in markets that the long-term holder has his quoted value of his stock go down and then by, say, 50%. In fact, you can argue that if you're not willing to react with equanimity to a market price decline of 50% 2 or 3 times a century, you're not fit to be a common shareholder, and you deserve the mediocre result you're going to get compared to the people who do have the temperament, who can be more philosophical about these market fluctuations. Now, at a place like Berkshire Hathaway or even the Daily Journal, we've done better than average. And now there's a question, why has that happened? Why has that happened? And the answer is pretty simple. We tried to do less. We never had the illusion we could just hire a bunch of bright young people and they would know more than anybody about canned soup and aerospace and utilities and so on and so on and so on. We never had that dream. We never thought we could get really useful information on all subjects, like Jen Kramer tends to have. And we always realized that if we worked very hard, we could find a few things where we were right, and that a few things were enough, and that was a reasonable expectation. That is a very different way to approach the process. And if you had asked Warren Buffett the same thing that this investment counseling did, give me your best idea this year, and you just followed Warren's best idea, you would find it worked beautifully. But he would, trying to know the whole, he would give you 1 or 2 stocks. He had more limited ambitions. I had a grandfather who was very useful to me, my mother's grandfather, and he was a pioneer, and he came out to Iowa with no money but youth and health, and took it away from the Indians. He fought in the Black Hawk, he was a captain in the Black Hawk Wars, and he stayed there, and he bought cheap land, and he was aggressive and intelligent and so forth, and eventually he was the richest man in the town and owned the bank and highly regarded in a huge family and a very happy life. And he had the attitude, having come out to Iowa when the land was not much more than $1 an acre, and having stayed there until that black topsoil created a modern, rich civilization in some of the best land in the world. His attitude was that in a favored life like his, when you were located in the right place, you just got a few opportunities if you lived to be about 90. And the trick in coming out well was seizing a few opportunities that were your fair share that came along when they did. And he told that story over and over again to the grandchildren who hung around him all summer. And my mother, who had no interest in money, remembered the story and told it to me. But I'm not my mother's natural imitator, and I knew Grandpa Hingham was right. And so I always knew from the very first, when I was a little boy, that the opportunities that were important that were going to come to me were few, and that the trick was to prepare myself for seizing the few that came. This is not the attitude they have at a big investment counseling thing. They think if they study 1 million things, they can know 1 million things. And of course, the result is almost nobody can outperform an index. Whereas I sit here with my Daily Journal stock, my Berkshire Hathaway stock, my holdings in Lilu's Asian fund, my Costco stock, and of course I'm outperforming everybody.